Tonight's the 19th of Mar-Heshwan, and there's still a war going on. So we pray for speedy victory. And that's the only thing we could pray for. We shouldn't just pray for end of war. We have to pray for a victory. We have to keep that in mind. God is the one who grants victory. How do we make sure that God's on our side? There's only one way to do that. It's by following his laws. And contrary to what you might see elsewhere, God actually does instruct us how to run a country. He actually does instruct us how to conduct wars. I know I've seen it a few places that from alleged even rabbinical types that these types of issues are not governed by halacha at all. Couldn't be farther from the truth. There's halacha and there's midrash. There's a lot to say about it. So make sure you're getting information from proper sources. If the last 4 years have taught you anything, it's that know whom to trust. Okay, so this week we're talking about Avram Avinu's trials. Why? Because at least in the annual cycle, we're right in the middle of Avram Avinu's story. Now, there's quite a few opinions out there among the sages as to what were the 10 trials. How do we know there are 10 trials? Because it says concerning Abraham that in Pirkei Avos it actually says that Abraham was tested 10 times. It is only at one of them that it actually says God tested Abraham. All the other times, it just introduces a story. And that's why there's actually a dispute among Rishonim and Geonim how to count Abraham's trials. We like to point out, Rambam says on his Perush to Pirkei Avos, for example, that the 10 trials are the ones are only that which is told explicitly in the Torah. So he discounts the well-known story, which he himself acknowledged, of Abraham basically giving up his life for the sake of the truth, taking on Nimrod. So that's, even though most consider that a trial, he does not, because that's not described in the Torah. Okay. But we could see that there's a pattern developing with whatever it is that Abraham, the stories we see about him. And let's just assume every major story had an element of trial in it. For example, he counts having to chase away both Hagar and Ishmael as separate trials. Okay, that's very interesting. He counts that as separate trials. Okay, but the point is, we agree that there was some sort of test involved in this. What is the tzad shaveh? What is the tzad shaveh? And that seems to be Abraham trying to moderate his compassion. Let's go through what happens to him. First, he has to leave his family. He has to put up with his wife being kidnapped. That's twice. He has to part ways with his nephew, who was basically his only son. He was basically adopted his nephew, and that was who was supposed to be his heir, apparently, until, or presumptively. Heir apparent means he actually has a son. Heir presumptive means someone's going to inherit unless he has a son. And having to go to war to save his nephew eventually, even though he had parted ways with him, afflicting Hagar. What happened? And she sort of had some chutzpah towards Sarah. So Abraham said that it's okay for Sarah to punish her maidservant and put her in her place. All these issues. Oh, and by the way, let's look for more of them. He eventually had to pray for Sodom. He had to subject himself and his followers and his son to circumcision. He had to pray on behalf of those who actually took his wife. Those were the Philistines. He had to eventually chase and wife his son. He had a difficulty making peace with the Philistines. Perhaps there was almost a form of extortion there, and even child sacrifice. So let's see, how does this work? Abraham had to basically learn to moderate his to his strongest character trait. What was his strongest character trait? Overwhelming compassion. And the problem was he had to learn how to apply it. A person like Abraham, you could understand, was greatly tested by anything that had to do with something that could possibly happen to his children. And God was basically showing him through all these tests how to apply his compassion in the right directions and how to be cruel, like we discussed last week, how to be either cruel or perhaps indifferent when necessary. Based on what we saw last week, by the way, what is the definition of someone who has a cruel personality or lacking in compassion? We said a person who cannot have children or a person who's yet to have children. Based on the sage's definition there, Abraham basically was cruel or had not learned a certain measure of compassion or hadn't developed this quality until he was 86 years old. That's only when he began to develop this. So you can understand someone whose overwhelming character trait was his compassion. You can understand how much more so it became the second he had children. Another issue was Abraham had to learn to distinguish between Ben Adam Lakom and Ben Adam Lachaviro, and how sometimes you have people who are thoroughly wicked, like the Sodomites. Abraham, we could say, intervened on their behalf twice, once through war and once through prayer, because he perceived them as not having done wrong to others. If they had been guilty of, let's say, murder or other crimes, so Abraham might have even fought against them. However, their crimes were between them and God. And this is very important because when we talk about how to conduct a war, how to deal with the wicked, sometimes we have to acknowledge that there is a limit to what human justice is able to accomplish or what human judges are able to judge for themselves. Judges can only see what they see, only the evidence that's presented before them, and only evidence that is fairly presented before them. They cannot see into people's emotions. They cannot truly evaluate motivations or perhaps any other emotions that go into or mitigating circumstances, go into someone deciding to do something wrong or perhaps doing something right. Human judges are completely fallible. And that's why we have to understand sometimes if God has given us the commandment, or we've seen it, God needs us to fight an enemy and perhaps even destroy what those even we perceive to be innocent. That's not our call. God has only given us what we see, and we have to act on it. However, God Himself, the true judge, does have some checks on this on these types of cases. God Himself sees everything, knows everything, is the true judge, and that's why, for example, He could bring natural disasters upon places. Sodom, God couldn't have said, perhaps it's time for human beings to punish Sodom. Abraham himself felt that that wasn't the case. When the Sodomites were punished and taken into exile, basically by foreign oppressors, Abraham intervened because, as far as he knew, this is at least what he could see. It was unjust. However, God Himself keeps a check. God could say, you know what, I'm going to use a natural disaster to destroy these people. So we have to see, just like Abraham, that sometimes we can only deal with what we see. That's very important for us. We should not be making or trying to be too smart when it comes to meting out justice, whether on a national scale or an individual scale. We have to follow exactly like Abraham did. Follow God. Be tamim. What is tamim? Accept everything God has to say. That means follow His commandments, whether we find them to be against our nature, our compassionate nature. That's what Abraham was taught. There are too many people out there. I see even Jews who are almost uncomfortable with the way this war is going on. We have warned about this for a few weeks now, and now we're actually seeing it. The invasion of Gaza is in full swing, and the Jewish men are losing their lives. And many of us think unjustly. They should not be endangering themselves. They should do like any other normal army would and just destroy from far away, only bring in troops when it's completely safe. But what are you going to do? They're not doing that, and we hope that God protect them from their enemies and from their commanders. But I repeat myself, and we also see that we can't start making these second calls. There's too many people who are saying, yeah, but oh, maybe it's getting too much. There are too many people dying on the other side also. That's not for us to even consider. Firstly, because they're the enemy and they're not innocent. Secondly, because God has put this war in front of us and it's our job just to do it. If He wanted to save these people, He would do so, just like He has capacity to punish these people. So let us try to walk in Abraham's footsteps. Abraham was taught to conquer his compassion, as we mention whenever we invoke the merit of the binding of Isaac. And so too, we have to learn kal v'chomer to conquer whatever pieces of compassion we have in our souls for those who are trying to kill us. Okay? You have to conquer your emotions, and you have to learn to follow what was right.